I've always wanted, though, to be known basically as a teller of tales, rather than a playwright or a novelist or any of these other more specific names. I call the book Gallows and Other Tales of Suspicion and Obsession, because actually there are two stories that specifically deal with executions. But there's also a vein of gallows humour running right through the book, which I felt should be signalised in the title. There's murders and ghosts and a lot of spying and blackmailing. The atmosphere of suspicion and obsession kind of runs through them all, so I put it down as a subtitle. It's a modern ghost story, but it begins in the 18th century with a doctor who's hanged for murdering children. He's a sort of early version of Dr. Mengele. He brings children into his laboratory and cuts them up. And there he is looking for them on the edge of Galway Harbour. These are, to some extent, illustrative, I think, of the way I compose a story, that I do see a setup of a number of people coming together in a state of some passion or other in a particular setting, forming a design as they do it. I like to do pictures about my stories, even if they're not very good pictures. It gives me a sense, or sort of sense of achievement. Ever since I was about 7 years old, and I had copies of I was given a copy of the Dr. Dolittle books, where it says, by Hugh Lofting, illustrated by the author. And I always thought then that I wanted to be an author who illustrated his own books. Well, publishers, unfortunately, won't go for that, unless you are a very well-known artist. Well, actually, the one time they did do it was in The Island of the Mighty, when they put some drawings of mine in the text, but since then nobody's wanted to do it. It's based on a story called Dreadfully Attended, which is a fictional version, basically, of the disastrous history of an experimental battleship called HMS Captain, which was built in the 1860s, and it shows an attempted assassination of a British admiral by an Irish girl whose father drowned in the new ship promoted by the said admiral. What I've got around the wall are the pictures that I've already done, illustrating my stories. Well, this one is from a picture called Molly Concannon and the Felonious Widow. I've written 2 stories about Molly Concannon already in my earlier book, The Stealing Steps. And she is a 60-ish Galway lady of literary tastes. She writes poetry and articles for the newspapers and things like that. And she is eccentric to the extreme. She's setting fire to a police station.
She's based on anyone?
No, she's not. She's a confected figure out of 2 or 3 people whom I know.
Not Margaret.
No, she's not Margareta. Everybody asks if she's Margareta. She certainly isn't Margareta. She's actually getting a little deranged, and she has memories of what she regards as her wicked youth when she took part in a bit of local witchcraft in Connemara with some girls at college. Ireland and England have got very mixed up in my makeup now. Everything I've written in the last 40 years has been influenced by that. I was born and brought up in Yorkshire, in Barnsley, in the black industrial parts of the county. My father came from Beverley in the agricultural eastern part of Yorkshire, with its medieval atmosphere. It's the old-fashioned country town with the churches and the historic background. Both of these places influenced me a lot in my writing. Live Like Pigs is the first play I wrote to be given a full professional production more than 50 years ago now. I began as a playwright before I started writing either novels or short stories. In the real theatre it's a moving design. In the toy theatre it just is there. You shove the characters in on bits of wire and they're static. In my pictures they're even more static. You just have one moment for each story. The stories aren't stylized in the way that my pictures are stylized. It's a different take on them, and it's a sort of a theatrical take. And I suppose if I'm influenced by any previous illustrator, it will be the early illustrations to Dickens, particularly Cruikshank's, in which exactly the same thing happened. If you look at his engravings, etchings rather, for Oliver Twist, you will see all the characters in traditional theatrical conjunctions. Now, one thing that those examples never do is put in a bit of sexuality. But you go back another 50 years and you get somebody like Rowlandson, or Gilray, the late 18th century caricaturists, who fill their work with stuff like that, and I like it and I put it into some of my pictures. It's always comic in the pictures, it's not comic in the story. I find in the stories it seems to lead to all sorts of difficulties and troubles for the individuals. The pictures, however, are of a more idyllic nature. A kind of paradise garden. I have my own personal paranoia. I try not to take any notice of it. I try not to allow my resentment of the world at large to get in the way of my normal human relations. Sometimes it's a bit difficult. I sublimate it by putting it into my work to a very large extent. The origins of the conspiracy theory in history I find fascinating. I mean, you can go back as far as Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot, Fenian plots against Britain in the 19th century, all of these infiltrated by groups of so-called security forces who were twisting and turning and presenting spins that bear no relation to what really went on. I love to observe it in other people. Nearly everybody you meet in Galway seems to have some sort of obsession or suspicion of somebody. Then there is a degree of paranoia of personal relationships that is really quite horrific. I find it a stimulating situation for a writer to listen to all this, but it does tend to sour one's disposition a little and make one rather cynical. I don't use happy endings very often. I don't really believe in happy endings. As soon as you come out of a dangerous or unpleasant situation and begin to relax and begin to congratulate yourself on being safe and sound, suddenly a little creature comes out of its hiding place and bites you on the heel.